Hello, good night. Welcome to Legalize this 28th day of September 2005. And we have tonight with us Dr. Candia Mitchell-Hall, Grenadian, who is a lecturer at the Institute of Caribbean Studies, Mona Campus, University of the West Indies, and Dr. John Angus Martin, Grenadian also, who is a specialist in Grenadian history and colonialism in Grenada. But before we start tonight's program, I just want to recognize those who sponsor this program: Jail Professional Solutions Inc., Gem FM carrying this program on FM radio out of Canada, and also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, GTAM.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Also, let me apologize for the absence of the co-host. Something came up and she had to attend to urgently, so she is unavailable. And also, we had hoped to have one of the speakers from one of the houses of parliament, but again, several persons were willing to come on, but it just proved inconvenient. So we have Dr. Martin and Dr. Hall. Good night, Dr. Martin. Good night, Dr. Hall. And I will call you Angus and Candia from now. That's all right?
Quite fine.
Okay, good. All right. So welcome. Well, I guess, Candia, you are aware that we are really happy to have you, and you are aware that part of the background to this program is advocacy that has been taking place in Grenada for many, many years, but it intensified over the recent period and resulted in a small but very significant change to Grenada's constitution. It's really the first change in 50 years, which in my view says a lot. And even obtaining that change, there was a lot of issues over it. But it has been done. As a Grenadian, how do you feel and come about it?
Thank you so much, Layne, for having me on your program, and greetings to your viewers. Greetings to Dr. Martin, my good friend Angus. No, I was excited for Grenada. It is really the right step in the right direction, that we are decolonizing ourselves, and that we are no longer continuing to have our nation, which is in contention with itself, as a nation with colonial relics and slavery relics. I was quite pleased as I saw the Prime Minister make the oath of allegiance to the people of Grenada and not to the British monarchy. And of course, when Grenada also celebrated Emancipation Day on August 1st, 2025, for the very first time, and I thought that we have truly begun to sing the songs of freedom. We are now becoming a nation. We are turning away from the oppression and from the colonial authority and power, and we are inserting our national identity within our parliamentary systems and how we conduct business, about the future of Grenada and also our present. So I was applauding, and I applaud the government of Grenada. I applaud the people of Grenada and all those who are activists in the background, those who are advocating for this kind of change, because we are a progressive people and we would continue to keep up this momentum, because it is the foot in the right direction that we have made. It is a step in the right direction.
Yes, and Angus, you muted John.
It's not me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've always seen that. Oh, thanks again for having me on. And Candia, have to be on here with you to discuss this. This is stuff that we talk about all the time. So I think when we got independence in 1974, I think most people were aware that this was the beginning of a process. I think we could look at that last 50 years and see there were times when we were up in terms of trying to make more progress towards really achieving that independence. But there are times when we were down and the process seemed to have stalled. I think what's going on now with what happened with this year legislation, as Candia talked about, I think is definitely, we've seen there's more action taking place now towards finally making that. And I think it's interesting that it wasn't until 2022, when the new government was being sworn in, is when people really noticed. I don't think that a lot of people were aware of it, or just it didn't register in the same way that, that it registered then. So I think it definitely changed, and maybe it's all because of some of the whole sort of things we're looking at, reparations and things like that. So I think it's definitely a lot of things that were not in focus are now coming into focus, and that is just one of the things I think that we were able to do, because we were able to come up with creative ways of looking at our constitution, which I think it's not something that's written in stone as we tend to think it is, but we have to look at how we can utilize that text, reinterpret that text to be able to benefit us. And that, I think, was a good thing that was done in making that change. It seemed like a small change, but it's probably more a huge change when you look at what comes next, I guess.
We have a little background feedback. I don't know from who. John, you try to arrange?
Yeah.
Getting a feedback from someone.
No,
You have any other?
no, I don't have anything. Just looking. I don't know where it's coming from either.
Okay, so I just should say, Candia, it is, in fact, it's more than the government. It was the entire parliament that voted for it. And there was, although some moments, but at the end of the day, there was all-party unity on that. And in fact, the opposition has expressed the view that, listen, they were the champions of change for the Constitution. They went to the people twice with referendums. On two occasions, they had a referendum, and the opposition, they have indicated that they continue to be committed to the process, and they consider this only a small change, and in fact, they favor more fundamental change. That was the position that was taken. Shortly after that change, Candia, I saw you wrote an article. It appeared in Now Grenada, and I think Angus had previously written on the issue of these colonial relics, these colonial symbols, these colonial artifacts, which are a part of and are to be found in our state bodies, the parliament, and that we also use a lot of our documents and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And you have sent some documents, some slides, which we will look at, and both you and Angus will tell us about them. Each of
Okay.
you can add, and then we will look at why you consider it offensive to have them as part of symbols for government bodies and the parliament. So if we can just look at the symbols,
Okay.
and I think we will start at the end. So let me first of all put the advisory, and let's start at the end. This is the fifth slide.
Okay. So that's the one at the end.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're looking at here are oppressive conditions on the plantation, and the point that we're making is that these symbols, especially those that are slave relics, they are tied to the oppressions of slavery, the brutalities of slavery. So some of us may not make the link or the connection, but it is certainly quite clear that when we are talking about slavery relics or colonial relics, we have to be mindful that these relics do evoke the times in which our people were oppressed and brutalized. So the image that we're seeing here on the left with a man that is being hung, an enslaved man, um, and he is a runaway. So he ran away, and he was found, caught, and hung, and made a public spectacle, so that the entire plantation, all of the enslaved peoples, could see um, the punishment. So this was a punishment to deter uh, other slaves from resisting slavery. The one on the left now, the one on the right, sorry, is one that depicts an overseer who has inserted a lance blow to an enslaved man who picked sugarcane and who was found eating sugarcane. So the point that we're making is that these relics are extremely oppressive. They demean the memory of the enslaved peoples. And while we may miss some of the significance, we must also understand that relics to slavery do speak to a time in which our people were unfree people. And so the larger point here is that to have emblems in our House of Parliament like the colonial mace, which has an image of the enslaved peoples working at the sugar mill with the Latin words that translates into English as "these shall be your arts and these shall be your skills." They remind us of these moments when our people were exploited, when they were brutalized, when they did not have their human rights, for example, and when they were treated as chattel, as property, chattel itself being a corruption of two words, cattle and chains, that they belonged to the planter. And of course, this was written into law. So, in a legal sense, their legal status was chattel property. Of course, women were considered as perfect chattel, perfect property, because they could reproduce the system of slavery. So, the point that we're making is that the colonial relics, especially those that are directly linked to these images, they are a stain on our national conscience because we know of the pain of what slavery was. We can see the pain through these images. We understand the trauma, and to continue to keep these relics, we are ignoring the experiences of those who had to endure it. We also cannot say that we are removed from slavery, or that this does not impact us, or this does not affect us, because we still live with the impact of slavery, we still live with the memory of slavery, and we still live with relics that speak to a time of our oppression, some of our darkest moments, how we were treated as inferior and inhuman, in not as human beings but as things listed with items, like goods that you buy, like rice or like flour advertised. So we're saying here that there is a broader conversation that we must engage with as well when we're talking about colonial relics. You do have to insert the people into the narrative, the people who endured the unfreedom, the people who endured the trauma and the oppression. So this is why it's important for us to properly contextualize these colonial relics. Because if we do not contextualize it, we remove their deeper meanings. And meanings are significant. Meanings tell us how people felt. Meanings tell us how people were treated. And meanings tell us that it is high time to ditch these colonial relics, these relics of slavery that inflict and harm and demean the memory of the enslaved peoples, our ancestors.
Mhm. And so, Joel, I'm just thinking as I saw this there of the story of what happened to some of those who were captured following the Benin Rebellion. Uh,
Right.
I guess you could speak about that because the popular version is that people were hung in the market square. It's also said some were hung at Grand Mall. And I guess it would have
Right.
been photos as these, in, incidents as these that as portrayed in this photo. That's what they would have experienced.
Right. Yeah. We had a number of executions that took place in the market square. There was actually a permanent gibbet like this at the back of the market square. That was a standard thing in lots of the colonies because punishment was a part of the system. It's part of what kept the system functioning, that terror. Um, so, following Pharaoh's rebellion, people were brought to the market square and they were executed. And throughout the rebellion, we know when some enslaved people were captured. Actually, the first individual that was hung in the market square was actually an enslaved. He had gone to the camp, he pleaded that it really wasn't me. I went with my master, but nonetheless that they didn't see that as something that would save him, and it was another enslaved that actually got the reward for turning that slave in. So it's really interesting when you look back at some of these situations, but I think the core of it was to create that terror, and that's why these things kept going the way they did. And in Pharaoh's rebellion, we know of at least 39 rebels that were executed at the end in the market square. Others were executed when they were found in the mountains and places like that. And there was one that was executed and left on Cherry Hill. I think Cherry Hill was the place, it seems. Everybody was going out of town. So on your way leaving town or coming into town, you would get to see the remains of the heads that were left there to remind people that this is what happens to you when you rebel or go against the system.
Okay. And this slide now says what?
So the top left now for your viewers would be an image of an enslaved man called Neptune. And this one is called Neptune being broken on the rack. So, just for your audience here, the images were drawn by planters. And this one comes from a planter from a plantation in Berbice in Guyana by the name of John Stedman. He liked to draw some of the punishments, and he drew this one, and this is how it has been passed on to us. So as you can see, and I imagine that your viewers are already thinking that slavery was extremely brutal because it is a black man who is doing the execution of Neptune. which makes it extremely difficult to look at, because the system of slavery pitted blacks against each other. It was rule and conquer, divide and conquer. And this is what we're seeing here. So, what was Neptune's crime? He ran away and he was found. And now that he was found, he was being executed on the rack. This kind of emasculation took place on many of the plantations in the Caribbean, not just in Guyana. This is not an isolated example, but this also took place in Grenada and throughout the British West Indies in particular. So, what we're saying here is that when the colonial relics are removed to the library, for example, or the museum, they can be properly contextualized in terms of narratives, in terms of audio visuals, in terms of um, important exhibitions, for example, interactive exhibitions, because when we leave the relics, then we do not explain the deeper experiences. This incident that we're seeing here is one that has caused a lot of shock, especially students studying Caribbean history, Caribbean culture, and Caribbean civilization, because it does say to them that slavery was continuously reproduced with all kinds of oppressive strategies that the planters were able to use against the enslaved peoples, pitting them against each other, saying, if you do this, you can receive your freedom. And many people would have essentially been forced to also execute their fellow slaves. No one was immune from these brutalities on the plantation. The other image, which would be the newer one of a woman, she's been branded. This also happened on the plantation. Women were branded with the seal of the planter, either his name or the plantation, as a mark of depersonalizing them, a mark of removing their basic humanity. And the point that we're making is that when we keep relics, we tend to often forget that people suffered. So it is not just the symbol of the relic itself, but it is also those who were held captive under the system as well. And this is why it is important for us to think about what national identity should mean to Grenadian people, to think about what freedom should mean. Should we constantly ignore these experiences of the enslaved peoples, or should we also remember that they suffered grave brutalities? And so we want to insert symbols that are triumphant, symbols that speak to our true arts, our innovation, our creativity, symbols that reflect strengthening our cultural economy, and not symbols that continue to perpetuate a system of oppression, a system of brutality, and a system of demeaning the enslaved peoples. And Angus will talk about some of these other punishments, on other forms of punishments as well across the British speaking Caribbean, some of which we do not teach in our secondary schools. Because, of course, we have been taught to teach a very specific narrative. It is a Eurocentric narrative, and what it does is that it enables the colonizer to constantly win, even in a moment of history, even in a moment when we're making freedom, because we deny the experiences, we deny the past. The colonizer wins over and over because we think that by confronting the history, we are traumatizing ourselves. But in leaving the relics, we are re traumatizing ourselves, even subliminally, even subconsciously, even when we are not aware. We are constantly demeaning ourselves because we do not talk about the deeper meaning and the deeper experiences of colonialism and plantation slavery.
Angus?
I guess I wanted, yeah, one of the things, the top left image, we actually have one similar image for the market square. It's called a four poster, where an enslaved person, for punishment, they will be tied hands and feet. they would be pulled, or there would be stakes in the ground, and they would be whipped. And we have actually 2 images that were based on observations from Grenada. And one of them describes it, and as Candia points out, the people doing the punishment were often enslaved people. Even on the plantation, the slave drivers were enslaved people themselves. So it's interesting when you look at some of these images and you try to understand them yourself and try to explain them to people who may not have studied or may not have a deeper knowledge, of what's taken place, what took place during slavery. So I think in looking at these images, people might say, but why are you showing us these images? And I think that the thing is the connection that the symbols that survive from slavery, that are today present within our society, are not contextualized. And I think probably in defense of some of the people that even interact with the mace, they probably don't even see the image that's on the mace because nobody's paying attention to it. I think there's a certain lack of awareness, but it's also because there's a lack of awareness of our own history sometimes. The fact that we don't teach a lot of this in our schools, in our curriculum, which some might say that even aspects of our curriculum go back to colonialism, and there are things that we need to change about our educational system to be able to accommodate discussions about slavery, enslavement, and some of these symbols that continuously are in the system and are not contextualized.
Okay, so tell us about this now. We saw the forms of punishment. Tell us about this slide here.
Okay. So what we're looking at is the colonial mace, and this colonial mace was used in the House of Representatives from 1780. It is a direct replica of the British House of Commons mace, and maces were originally used as a tool of violence, a lethal weapon to strike down opponents. So those who did not agree with the monarchs and dissidents and so on, but later, Angus has written about this in Now Grenada. It was adopted by the British in the House of Commons and House of Lords as a ceremonial symbol in the 17th century. So it was during the reign of Charles II. And later it would be used in coronations, state openings of Parliament, and so on. What we can see is that the colonial mace represents the power and authority of the British monarch and the British state. The meanings that were behind the mace when it was used in Britain.
You're breaking up a bit, Candia. I don't know why.
I am breaking up a bit. Okay, I was saying that the meanings remain intact for the mace, and within the colonial context, it's such colonial power over the mass of the people, and that we must also talk about the relationship between the colonial mace and slavery, that it imposes, of course, what Britain saw as its manifest destiny over colonized people. For example, in the 1780s, there were at least 100 plantations in Grenada with over 26,000 enslaved peoples. And plantation slavery grew under British colonization. There were at least 1,000 planters, and the entire Caribbean was under plantocracy. So the planters were the poor brokers. They also sat in the House of Representatives. So they also made rules for the colony, and they made the rules in their favor. The planters had a monopoly and a control over the political and judicial system. And of course, for them, this kind of control was important for them to maintain and defend their own economic interests. Right? Now, what is derogatory in particular on the mace is the image of the enslaved people.
Candia, you really breaking up bad. I don't know. Bentley
I am really
said,
breaking up badly.
Yeah.
Bentley said maybe the internet are beyond our control.
Yes.
Yes, it might be the
And it's
internet.
still happening. It might be the internet.
Yes.
I am going to try to go on personal data.
Okay, good. So I got if you can just come in the meeting.
Yeah, I think the mace, which I should add that it's one of the oldest in the world. It's actually it's a real massive piece when you look at it as an artifact, and it has a mystique about it. I think it tends to seem it actually the date on it is actually the British were not even in control of Grenada when this mace was made. So it was during the French period. So it really probably didn't show up in Grenada until the second British period. And that's when it became part of the parliamentary, the legislature and stuff during the second French period, the second British period. So this became the symbol, and this was the coat of arms of the British colonial government. And you see it's enslaved people working on a cattle mill. And this was one of the first mills that were in Grenada. We had quite a few of them. Actually, Grand Mall plantation would have cattle mill for its entire existence as a sugar plantation. So this would have been a common scene in Grenada. And as Candia pointed out, the quote on it says, "These shall be thine arts." And it's a quote from Virgil that the British used to, it's a Greek from the Greeks, and it meant that it is your right in this world to rule other people. In the case, it could have been meant that the British felt that it was their duty in this world to rule over conquered people. And it connects, the larger quote is like, if they don't allow themselves to be conquered, then you go ahead and do it. If they don't surrender to you, then you conquer them. And that was the sentiment of the British. They had won Grenada from the French, and on 2 occasions, and this symbol became their authority over Grenada. And
so let's explain to the and to the viewers. This appears in the parliament.
Yes, this is actually every time Parliament open, when we have opening of Parliament, this has to sit in Parliament, because if it's not there, it's a symbol of our parliamentary democracy. And if it's not present in Parliament, Parliament would not be, it would not be in keeping with the rules, yes. So this is something that's brought into Parliament. It sits in Parliament. It has a special place, both in the House and in the Senate. Each of them have their individual mace. This one is in the House of Representatives, and this one comes all the way down from the similar body that was back under the colonial government. So the Senate has its own, and this one is in the House of Representatives. And we've kept it on, I think, for probably the fact that we put value in it because of its age. It's a relic. It is an artifact that has come down to us without, I think, with much contextualizing it, or even people. I think a lot of people are just totally unaware that this is what it says and this is the image on it. I think if more people were aware of it, it would be questioned. So I think in defense of the people who interact with it, I think they don't pay much attention to what is on it and bring that to the forefront.
Yes. Candia, you want to come in? Let's try again.
I am being heard now. Am I back on?
Yes.
Yes, a bit better.
Yes.
Quite better.
Okay, that is better. Fantastic. And I was saying, I hope I didn't lose my train of thought, that we do have certain groups who argue that if we remove them from the House of Parliament and the Senate, that we are erasing history. So this is one of the contentions that we have seen and we have heard now that we are erasing history. We are relegating them to quote unquote nothingness, that they are seen as insignificant if we put them in the museum. But the point here is obviously that in the museum, the whole history of the mace can be told, for one, and that we need representations that come from our moments of triumph as well. We are in a moment where we are seeking to change our parliamentary sittings, where we are seeking to make ourselves a people who enjoy more of our freedom than people who are tied to just tradition for the sake of tradition. And I do agree with Angus that a lot of people do not know what the images are and the deeper meaning. So they simply just appear as part of parliamentary proceedings. But some of the parliamentary proceedings, of course, Grenada being a constitutional monarchy, is that they do extend the power and authority of the British monarch in Grenada. And so the idea here is that it is important to place these symbols in depositories of history, depositories of memory, our museums and our libraries, where we can tell the story properly, where people can engage with them effectively, and where they do not continue to be a blot on the memory of the enslaved peoples and ourselves. So we need symbols that symbolize us and our victories, our freedom, our emancipation, our independence, not symbols that participate in our exploitation, or symbols that talk about our exploitation, but symbols that reflect our becoming, symbols that are triumphant, symbols that reflect our cultural expressions. This mace in particular have no place in our House of Parliament. And as we continue to look at it, it becomes more and more offensive. As we continue to think about slavery, the harmful effects of slavery, and the ways in which the enslaved peoples were treated, right? The idea that Britain had manifest destiny or the natural right to control peoples that it considered to be quote unquote inferior is one which we're questioning here. And if we continue to keep these symbols, then we continue to buy in to those narratives. This colonial mace is one of those symbols that do that. The heavy hand of Britain over the colonized.
Yeah. Any
I would
special
just like to add,
significance of? Sorry, go ahead, Angus.
just like to add that um, people might say, but we've had this for so long. I should just like to add that in the 1960s, we actually created a mace for the for the Senate, because we did not have a Senate before. We had a colonial similar institution, but we did not have a mace for it. And one was created for the Senate. That, of course, is also problematic because it has Columbus's ship on it, because it had our second coat of arms on it, which was the bright out of darkness, I think is the Claire et tenebris, I think was I forget the Latin phrase, but that was from our second coat of arms before we got our current coat of arms since independence. So that in itself has problems because Columbus ship is reproduced on that because of our. So the idea of coming up with new maces is not something new. So that is something we can do, which could reflect us as opposed to reflect an earlier time that we would say is problematic now.
So these two bases here are
But
they
this is just
different
one. This is the same.
from two different angles?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And this now,
Okay. Angus, I should go or you would go?
Go ahead.
Uh, ladies first. So this is the coat of arms of Grenada, and all Grenadians would know that it is our official symbology, our official seal. It is placed on official documents of the state, of the government of Grenada. There are also offensive symbologies here that also reflect the period of colonialism and slavery. So we can start at the very top. The golden helmet that you're seeing here, which represents the
That's
crown
this
of,
year.
yes, the
Okay.
British crown that you're seeing here. We can also look, of course, the British crown over the power and authority of a people who have vested that power and authority in representatives that they vote for is what is problematic here, because the idea here is that the people do not vote for the crown and the people vote for their own representatives. So why is it that we have such an important symbol on our official symbology as a nation? We also have two golden lions. And if you look at them, one appears to be very confrontational. Both of them appears to be very confrontational. They are not indigenous to Grenada. Lions are not indigenous to Grenada. It would be better to have, and Angus is smiling there, but why do we have these lions? Lions represented British power and authority. They were considered as exotic. They were used to hunt down people and so on. And they became very, very important for British heraldry. And they would use it as a mark of how royal they were and their power and authority. So you are as fierce as the lion. They have nothing to do with Rastafari symbolisms, lion of the tribe of Judah. This is not the situation here. These lions do represent British power. And then, of course, you have, Angus would have mentioned, the Santa Maria. Now, as children growing up, we were taught, which is true, Columbus explored the ocean deeper with the largest ship, the Santa Maria. He had three ships that he was given by the Spanish king and queen, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. This is the largest one, the Santa Maria. It is offensive because it is tied to the myth, the narrative, the idea that Columbus was the great discoverer. And the argument that we're making here is that a people who already lived in a space for 2,000 years before Columbus could not have been discovered. Columbus met the indigenous peoples. Columbus arrived and did not discover the Caribbean and the Americas. It is quite offensive. When it comes to Grenada, Columbus did not even set foot. Columbus left a diary which states that he sighted Grenada, and he cited it on the Feast of the Concepcion, the Immaculate Conception, and he called it La Concepcion. The indigenous peoples who had inhabited Grenada at the time, the Kalinagos, they had been on Grenada for almost 2,000 years, 1,800 years before Columbus. So it is very, very clear that the indigenous peoples had already had their national and cultural sovereignty. The idea that Columbus's Santa Maria is on our coat of arms is extremely disturbing. Columbus did not intend to arrive in the Caribbean. He intended to go to Japan and Saudi Arabia and India and these places, not the Caribbean, not the Americas, because he did not know that that there was an American continent, the Americas, two American continents. He knew of Asia because there was a lot of trade happening, and he wanted to go to the Orient, right? And this is why when he got to the place, he called it Occidentalis, the Orient, the East. Columbus ended up in the Caribbean through a miscalculation and the transatlantic trade winds. And so when he came, his voyages of exploration opened up the floodgates to other European colonization, and it led to the extermination of the indigenous peoples. So to keep this symbol of European colonization on our coat of arms is to say that we are rejecting the memories of the indigenous peoples, that we're not appreciating their civilization and their culture, and we continue to hold on to the Eurocentric narrative and myth that the Europeans brought civilization to the Caribbean, to say that The people who had lived in the space made it sustainable to even survive for 2,000 years, paints a picture of a people's sustainability, that they had created a sustainable economic plan to survive for 2,000 years. But to reject that is to say that colonization was good, when we know there is no agreement worldwide that colonization was not good. No scholar, people who were colonized, do not say that colonization was good. Because when you're talking about colonization, you have to talk about how the colonized were treated. So to keep the Santa Maria is to ignore how exploitive colonization was, and to buy into that single narrative that Europe colonized, civilized the region. Europe brought civilization, their history and their culture was superior and better than all other civilizations, even those that existed in the space before the coming of Columbus. I remember when I was a child, we were taught this, and we were taught the single story narrative. We were so happy to have been discovered by Columbus. And I remember studying and entering University of the West Indies, and where the history was contextualized and placed into its broader perspective. And that is what needs to happen when we're educating the young people. And I remember that we were given a book, and it says Christopher Columbus discovered the Caribbean. Now, we had been exploring ideas of appreciating cultures, appreciating their civilization. And I remember it dawned on me as I sat there when the lecturer asked, "What is wrong with this? Is there anything wrong?" And some of us said, well, it must be wrong because it does not take into account the civilizations of people that Columbus met. To talk about discovery is to almost talk about a good thing happening, that are people who had nothing at all, whose culture was so inferior that they were blessed to have been visited, to be quote unquote discovered by the Spanish Europeans who came first. So to keep this is to say that we are perpetuating this narrative. Now, Trinidad, this year, February this year, had 3 Santa Marias. They had the 3 ships on the coat of arms, and they removed it in a bid to say that it is finally time to insert representations that reflect the innovation, the creativity, and the culture of the people, and not those that disturb the people and those that rob the people of their identity.
I guess I should add that what Trinidad did, they replaced the ships with steel band,
Absolutely.
which is one of their greatest creations. To point out a few other things, our independence coat of arms was done in 1974. In defense, I would say a lot of the way we taught about that history, the things that we think about today, were not thought about back then. There is no indigenous symbol on this. We did not even give any kind of credit to the indigenous peoples who were met in Grenada at the time. And symbols, we could at least put a conch shell on it, to symbolize that, now that it's part of Jab Jab Soca. So there are other things that we could, in hindsight, there are things that we could have done differently, but that was the prevailing history, I think, at the time. So I think in looking at our current symbol, there are things that we can do to improve it and make it more representative of who we are today and where we want to be in the future, I think, would be how I would look at the current symbols that we have. And just one little piece, the current pigeon on there, which was the Ramier pigeon, which was our national bird back in 74, but since 92, I think it is, the national bird is the Grenada dove, but that image has not been removed. The pigeon is still there, even though the national bird is now our national bird. So I think those are some little things that maybe we want to take a look again at these symbols,
Mm-hmm.
in how we move forward. What is our future? I think in looking at all of these things, one of the things that comes up is street names in Grenada.
Is what?
If you if you walk through St. George's, you would walk from Melville Street across
Yeah.
Halifax onto Hillsborough, Young Street. Most people don't even know the street names to begin with, much less who these people may be. And people who say again that we're trying to erase history, I would inform them that the French actually had place names as well that are gone. Because when the British came, they replaced their names in their image. And a place where we live should reflect who we are. So I think these are things that we can debate, but in reality, any place where we live should reflect who we are. Should these street names, and we did make a kind of half-hearted attempt, at changing a few street names. We did do Tyrrell Street was renamed Blaze Street, which I think was a mistake because that should have been Marishaw Street,
That's right.
considering that Marishaw House is on that street. But then again, we need to know where when we do these things, we have to do them properly. We can't just do them haphazardly as we have done in the past. So I think all of those things are things that should be brought up for debate, especially now that we have celebrated our 50th anniversary of independence. We need to take a look and see where we've come from and where we want to go into the future, and how these different symbols and these different monuments, place names, how do they affect us? Like I said, I think most young people don't even know the names of these streets. And maybe if we change them and put alternate ones, then we start something new in a sense, giving people ownership. And this should be a process that includes Grenadians in the naming of streets, which is not something that was done before. So I think we have to look at it in a different way, and give Grenadians monuments that they approve of, because they're the ones, Grenadians are the ones that inherited this place, and it should be in Grenadian image.
Absolutely agree with Angus. I was just saying, Layne, that Angus is so right, and if we do conduct consultation with the people, then they're part of the process, and that's important to make a nation, to remake a nation, for a nation to think about its own freedom. It must be involved in making freedom in a direct, deliberate kind of way. I was also going to say that the armadillo, which is on the left, might be the only, if there is such a thing, representation that there is a link to the indigenous peoples, in the sense that the armadillo, also called the tattoo, came from, right, yes, from the Americas,
And that's the
with,
start there.
yes, and they
Okay.
are now extinct, right? We do not have tattoos armadillo
It's,
anymore.
it's, it's endangered. It's endangered.
They're
Severely
endangered. So we
endangered.
have a few.
Yeah.
I've not heard of an
Yes.
armadillo tattoo in years. I would be happy to hear that the
That one
conservationists
or two
are,
around still.
they're one or two
Yeah.
making attempts to ensure that they're
They're still
not,
legally, they are still legally hunted.
they are still legally hunted during the open
Yes.
season. Okay,
They
so
have,
those,
yes.
yeah,
Yes.
that would be the only link too. But again, without proper contextualization, without putting it into perspective, then it just looks like a prop holding up the shield of the British Lion. If you see what we're looking at here in the Santa Maria, so
Mhm. Right.
again, we can replace those images with national figures or national animals and symbols that represent us. Angus mentioned, the conch shell and jab jab, and I absolutely agree. The jab jab helmet can replace the helmet that is there, the royal helmet, absolutely. The seal of the nation should reflect the nation. It should be part of the national culture. And jab jab is Grenada. Jab jab is Grenadian. It's in our blood. It's in our DNA. It is part of our freedom making, part of our resistance strategies, and it is part of our identity. When people meet Grenadians now, it is now about jab jab more than ever. Grenada is associated with jab jab, and recently, when jab jab was in Times Square, everybody all over the world was talking about jab jab. Jab jab is as Grenadian as Grenada is to oil down. And so whatever we do, we should ensure that these symbols speak to our cultural economy. What makes revenue for Grenada? And spice mass and jab jab and our other cultural expressions, the veko, the shortney, the mokojombi could replace some of those things there, like the golden lion that we see. The mokojombi could be there, sign of protection over the community and over the village, over the people, right? And these would reflect a truer sense of a Grenadian national culture and identity than some of these representations and symbols that are tied
Candia,
to British nationalism. Yes,
Candia, I think it would be a hard sell because
I know.
we do see a lot of our local culture as inferior. And until we get to the point where, because that's why these things, it's heraldry. That's why we have these crowns and things like that on the symbol. And like I said, in 1974, our thinking was nowhere where it is today.
Absolutely.
But I think it would be a hard sell to convince even people that are very proud of the jab helmet or something, that would be the stuff you would put on something like your coat of arms. I'm not so sure that we believe in these symbols for ourselves, that we want to take it to that level. Hopefully I am proved wrong, but I don't think we are in a place where we actually see it as national symbols or international symbols, the things that can represent us to the world.
Yeah, I agree with you,
and
Angus.
I think it will be something that I'm willing to discuss and see where we can, if people are ready for something like that.
No, I absolutely agree. It would take a lot of education, a lot of, like systemic education within our teaching of Grenadian history. It's going to take teaching the younger generations about the importance of these expressions, that they do speak to our identity and our indigenous cultural forms and what they mean for us in terms of the political economy, what they mean for us when people see a jab jab, what it means when people hear jab jab. It means that more than likely you're coming to Spice Mass. It means that you're telling your friend about Spice Mass. It means that you're buying Grenada, you're selling Grenada, right? You're enjoying Grenada. And I agree with you, Angus. There are still many parts of our cultural identity and expressions that we do have to work out. But it is worth the confrontation. It is worth wrestling over. So if it means wrestling, if it means talking over and over, meeting in different forums so that we trash it all out, that we work out all the contradictions, it will be worth it, right? I am hopeful and I believe in our Grenadian future and our younger generations who are our greatest jab jab advocates and activists. And I believe it's in their blood, it's in their DNA. If we do not get it right, they will get it right. But I am with you that there is a lot of contestation still and a lot that we need to work out, right? Because we're also double conscious, aren't we? We were also taught that these expressions were evil and they were bad. And some of us do hold on to some of these views because we were a colonized people. So you were told that jab jab, no, that's obia, that's devil worship, when it is not. It is a form of resistance. It's an expression of the people. It's part of their identity. It's a rememory of the horrendous nature of slavery, but it also celebrates emancipation, survivalism, collective memory of the people, collective becoming, because African people is not a monolithic group. They have different languages, different religions, different ideas, different nationalities, different ethnicities. But in the Caribbean, in the New World, they became nation, right? And Jab Jab was a symbol through which they could express that collective experience of becoming. We have a lot to talk about. And if we are really serious, I think we are, we can get it done. It may not happen now, but it would be a process. And I'm happy that we have begun the process.
Right. So let's just take a break and again recognize those who sponsored this program: Jail Professional Solutions Inc., JMFM carrying this program on FM radio out in Canada, and also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers, GTAC.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Okay. Let me ask though both Candia and Angus. How would you respond to the argument or the view, not really argument, a view, that, for example, the coat of arms here is really a reflection of the nature of our state, basically a constitutional monarchy. That's all it reflects. That's how we are, that's who we are, and that this coat of arms here is consistent with that.
That's a tradition argument. That it is part of the tradition. Don't change it. Don't think about it. Leave it as it is. Okay, so there are two schools of thought. The traditional one, and of course, there is also the progressive one. And the progressive one is that we have started to make the momentum. We have started to make the change. We're on our way to become a republic. To the people who argue that we should leave it as it is, we cannot. Grenada is a progressive nation. And if we look at our anthem, if we look at our motto, we can see that we are a people who aspire and we build and we advance. And we hold to those values as truth when it comes to a moment of historical reckoning. This is a moment of historical reckoning. If anybody lived in this moment, the moment of Black Lives Matter, the moment of reparative justice, and the moment of republic making, becoming a republic, there is absolutely no way that you can look at these symbols and say, stick with tradition, leave it as it is. We have begun to make the change. And it is quite clear that the Grenadian people, we hold to tradition, but we hold to tradition that add value. When the tradition disrupts nation making or freedom making, or when it stands directly in a moment in which it is quite clear that we are to take a particular path, then we follow that as a progressive people who build, who aspire, and who advance. And so I do not agree with the tradition perspective. It denies our national identity. It denies the lack of connection people feel to these symbols. And we also live in the age of technology and the age of information. And so, as we live in this age, it is quite clear that we now know. Angus said that years ago, to be fair to the ways in which we were taught in the 90s and the 80s and before that and so on, we did not know because the shift had not taken place. But that is the whole point of the human trajectory. That is the whole point of human time and human evolution. Things that you do not know, there is a point in time when you do know. We see Barbados, who in 2021 became a republic and named Rihanna Fenty as a national hero. And when I saw that happen, I thought to myself, we will one day do it. But just as we see now in Barbados, there were opposition to Barbados becoming a republic. You have a specific groups in the society who like the idea of the British monarchy, for example, and the symbols. And the thing about liking an idea is that one must also be open to difference. One must be open to what the meanings specify and symbolize. We cannot hold on to tradition that is now very costly because we do not want to be left behind. And so the time has come. Now, I love history. And history is not just about a moment in time. It is also about consequences and impact. That is what history is. And so we are at a pivotal moment in our history where we do understand tradition, but we do have to also carve out the kind of future that we want, where we control our own cultural sovereignty. When, as we saw, the oath of allegiance, not to the British monarch and to the British people, but to the people of Grenada. It was a moment of pride that it is the people of Grenada we owe our sovereignty. And because of that, the people of Grenada are more important than tradition that continue to destabilize us. Traditions that say to us our homegrown indigenous cultural expressions are inferior. Traditions that say to us we will play a blind eye to what these images really mean, the deeper meanings. Tradition is what says, do not revise the past, do not confront the past, do not wrestle with the past, continue to ignore the exploitative nature of the past in the name of tradition. We must not turn a blind eye to the kind of freedom that we're making now. And if we hold on to tradition, we will never sing the songs of freedom in a way in which we can truly experience that kind of freedom. I say, ditch the tradition that are the meaning. Ditch the tradition that perpetuate narratives of exploitation and cling to Grenada, cling to our innovation and our creativity as a Grenadian people. Right, Angus? How do you square out?
I think it's pretty simple for me. The traditions of my grandmother is not the traditions of my mother, nor my traditions. Traditions change all the time. We don't carry over everything. You always hear older people would say they ain't even know anything about this. They've lost it. We've always been losing things. We've decided what we want to take to the next generation. That is a constant part of evolution of society. So I have no issue. There's nothing to defend. I think tradition always changes. There are things we lose, and there are things. That's why we have museums and libraries and other institutions and archives where you could go research all of the traditions that we no longer even are aware of. Most people are unaware of so many of the traditions that have gone before. So we keep certain baggage that we like and we enjoy, but there are others that we drop along the way for different reasons. And with technology, we can revisit lots of things. These traditions can find themselves part of our art, in the future. We tell different stories and the way we tell them. So I don't see, to me, there's nothing to defend, that we're getting rid of traditions. We've always gotten rid of traditions. And that will continue to get rid of traditions. But we have institutions that maintain them.
The difficulty, is that in terms of how our state is set up, governed by the 1973 document, the Constitution, 1973, the Constitution coming out of the Independence Constitution, for put it simply, it poses some serious issues in terms of making change. Okay. Also, how do you answer to this? When I sent out a promo for today's program, someone contacted me and said, "But Layne, listen, slavery was the law at the time. Slavery was lawful. 1, 2, many of slavery was also contributed by Africans, selling Africans to the Europeans. 2, and thirdly, in regard to the British, they said the British were not the original slave owners in Grenada." So how do you respond to those three? You can take it one at a time. A, slavery was the law. And therefore, all the complaints about slavery and all the talk about reparations and so are kind of out of place because that was the law at the time. A.
I,
B, the second one is that Africans, African people contributed to slavery. They were the ones who sold their brothers and sisters into slavery. And thirdly, the British actually met slavery in Grenada when they took Grenada from the French.
wow, I've never heard the last. So I have to say there that one is quite original. Never heard that you could justify slavery like that. It was still wrong. And even though it was sanctioned by law, it was still wrong. Slavery was a crime against humanity. It was the most oppressive system of labor that the world has ever seen. The form of transportation via the Middle Passage was also very horrendous, the most horrendous journey known to man, where people were packed as sardines in a tin, as though you were packed in your coffin, in your casket. The conditions of slavery were very brutal, as we saw with the images, and the justifications do not make slavery right. What the justifications do is that they simply deny the reality that slavery was a crime against the humanity of a people. Scholars the world over have written on the conditions of slavery and what it really was. So, that first argument that it was sanctioned by law, what it does is that it adds value, it validates the argument that we're making here because the laws were made in the House of Assembly, the House of Representatives, weren't it? So it does add weight to our argument. It is for the very reason why we argue that we must get rid of these colonial relics and relics that represent slavery. So that one, we can throw it out of the water. Yes, the planters were the legislators. They were the one making the laws on their behalf. And your viewers may not have heard this, or some may have heard, but in the space of the Caribbean, what we had was that the planters were making the laws as they went along. In the Caribbean, there were no official laws from the British Parliament to govern slavery when it began. As a matter of fact, the colony was talking back to the metropole, and the metropole were following what the planters were doing in the colonies. It was later that the British Parliament adopted these laws into its constitution. So it is quite clear, and the way in which the plantation were being run, it is quite clear that the planters had created a system that benefited them. And it does not mean that because it had worked for all of these years that it was right. That is why the same British Parliament abolished slavery. On the grounds, one, we know that they said it was immoral, the work of the humanitarians, some of whom were also supported slavery, but not the slave trade. We have humanitarians like those, like the famous one, William Wilberforce, for example, did not support the slave trade, supported slavery. Secondly, it is also another argument was that the slaves themselves had abolished slavery because they fought against the brutal conditions that were written into law against the humanity. Two, and the third point was that the system had become overgrown. It had become uneconomic. So the same values and the same reasons that justified slavery was the same reasons that ended it, right? Didn't it? So that argument, we can put that one to rest. The second one, Africans selling Africans. I'm not sure if Angus wants to respond to the first, or we should just go through the three and then the other three, right?
I can add that the fact that something was law at a specific time, I think the argument that the same parliament that would have agreed to slavery is the same parliament that got rid of it. But also because something is accepted at one time in a legal sense, I think the fact that when these laws were passed in support of slavery, there were always people protesting them on the same grounds that they were being supported. So it's not something that people were unaware. It's like, oh, we're doing slavery, but we really don't know what's going on, kind of thing. And later on, we figured out that it was bad, so we're going to change it. I think people were always aware that slavery was bad. There were always people protesting slavery. So the argument of because it was law, and this is do not want to make a direct comparison, but when you look at Germany, there were laws that supported what was done to the Jews, but we still see that as the crime that it was. So yeah,
But
I do not take
why
it.
is it not a direct comparison?
I think it's different period and different things. We're looking at different things. I think
Mm-hmm.
we can see these things in their own light, but
Mm-hmm.
nonetheless, we can look across and recognize that there are some similarities in how they both came about, and the
Oh no,
fact that
no.
one was
I
done.
wasn't talking about in terms of. I was at, because one of my
Mhm.
responses was okay. It's for people who deal with legal philosophy, jurisprudence. They will see it as an argument. In other words, because coming out of World War II, the same problem was faced. When the laws passed by the Third Reich uh, under Hitler, were they laws? And those persons who
Right.
followed those laws and did evil things were they protected? Yeah,
Hmm.
and I
Right.
think that question has been answered, although there's still
Hmm.
that argument in jurisprudence. But the issue here is the answer is same as with the Germans, not because it was law, but if they were bad laws, in fact, not bad laws, evil laws. Yeah, and we now recognize it as being crimes against humanity. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
uh, are they protected? Because that's one of the arguments, sometimes made directly so, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
not made so directly. But that's one of the arguments that some people try to mount
Mm-hmm.
against reparations.
Mm-hmm.
That was the law at the time. So really, if it was the law of the time, then there's no obligation to recompense or to restitute. So that's the only
Right.
way. I'm not saying with it is a direct parallel in terms of
Hmm.
the system, but in terms of the argument, the same argument could be applied to the slave laws as were applied to the German laws.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
Right. Didn't
yeah, go ahead.
the Germans still have to pay reparations to Israel?
yes, indeed, they pay reparations to Israel. Yeah.
Right.
So, and what's about the point of view that they were Africans who were complicit in terms of the slave trade, and,
So,
and
yes.
therefore, and therefore, one should not. That's how I kind of get it. The
Mm-hmm.
person who spoke to me was not exactly making that point, but I've heard this point, being that
Right.
listen,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Africans were complicit, and therefore you should not put all the blame
Mm-hmm.
and the entire focus should not be on Britain or the French or the Spanish as it is.
Okay,
Just,
so we will
just
respond. Yeah,
yeah,
we will respond. We will
yeah,
respond to it. And I was going to say for the first point as well that the nature and the tone of that kind of oppression were different and in the ways in which they were written into law. So the experiences, for example, of the Jews under the German was certainly different from the tone and nature of slavery of the West Africans under chattel slavery, which was a much longer period. And so I think that is why Angus said, it's historians and scholars are very careful when it comes to seeing it in a sort of comparative way, because it is as almost as though you're talking about two similar experiences, but one that was longer. And because it was longer, the horrendous nature of it was extended over millions of people, right? Okay, so the Africans selling Africans. So, yes, this is one of the pointers that are brought against the reparative justice, social justice movement. And this has been rubbished by historians. There is one historian by the name of John Taunton, and he wrote a book called Africa and Africans in the Atlantic World. And in the book, he argued that the nature and tone of slavery was not the same in Africa as what became chattel slavery in the Caribbean. In other words, there were also laws, same laws, protecting the enslaved peoples in West Africa. The laws were based on custom and tradition. So it was based on a system in the society where those who were wealthy could afford to take on laborers. In other words, he said that the worker was not a slave in the West African system in terms of how we know chattel slavery to be, but they were a worker. The argument here is that you're talking about two different systems. One in West Africa, which was based on tradition, it was indigenous, so it was protected by law. It meant that everybody in the society looked the same. Chattel slavery in the Caribbean added a dimension of race, and it added the aristocracy of the skin. It meant that if you were white, you were essentially the powerful, the master. And if you were black, you were chattel and you were property. Now, he also said that these chiefs who sold the slaves to the Europeans were unaware of the nature of slavery in the Caribbean. Why? Because the only prerequisite that they had was domestic slavery in West Africa, where people had human rights. So, in other words, chattel slavery added one, a dimension of race, but it also added the economic value to slavery. In the West African system, the economic value was not so much pronounced because they were all Africans, they were all black. So it was a class system, it was a class issue, right? Where a wealthy person could afford to have and buy and sell people to work, but that their human rights were protected under Islamic law. So, for example, a child who were born into slavery in West Africa was free. In the Caribbean, that was not the same thing based on the law. A child who was born into slavery got the status of the mother, and that child was a slave. So the point is being made here, therefore, that yes, the African chiefs were complicit, but one, they did not understand the nature of slavery. Two, they did not gain the lion's share of the profits of slavery. What did West Africa gain from slavery? The Guyanese scholar Walter Rodney said that Europe underdeveloped Africa. So if you're looking at economic gain, if you're looking at who benefited from slavery, Europe was developed and Africa was underdeveloped. Their systems, their traditions were corroded. The Europeans were like parasites on West Africa. Their traditions, their economic systems, their social values were corroded, and they experienced underdevelopment to the point at which they're still playing catch up. So if you look at who benefited, while we can throw the African chiefs in there, they were greedy. Yes, some say they were greedy. Some say that they were too expansionist. They wanted European guns, for example, and they were trading that. The other argument is that there were chiefs who did not participate in the slave trade. But because of what the Europeans were trading, like guns and so on, they had to join to protect their communities because they themselves, the chiefs themselves, were being taken to the plantation under chattel slavery. So here we have the argument. Hopefully, we can put this argument to rest. Yes, the chiefs were involved, but one, they did not know that chattel slavery was what it was. Slavery in West Africa was different from chattel slavery, and so on. Secondly, Europe gained. Who gained more from slavery? Africa was clearly underdeveloped, and Eric Williams said it. Europe got the Industrial Revolution, which was fueled by the plantation economy and slavery, right? Angus, you can chime in if.
Yeah, I think we can accept both things. It does not accepting that Africans participated does not exempt Europe. And the reason why one can seek reparations from Europe is that they benefited the most, as Candia pointed out. I think we've had several African chiefs, descendants of some of those same communities that sold Africans, their captive Africans to Europeans. They have come out and apologized for the participation of their ancestors in some of these in the slave trade and the captives of Africans. And we know that there, lots of people that came from internally, were brought to the coast by Africans um, because of the benefits they derive in trade with Europeans. So I think we can look at both things and we can look at them differently. But Caribbean people, in deciding, they make the decision of who they want to reach out to in terms of that discussion on reparations. The fact that Europeans control the Caribbean all the way up to the 60s and 70s. So it's not just about slavery itself that ended 180 years ago, but all of what has happened since. So I think it's a much larger discussion and involvement that we're looking at than just what happened on the West African coast.
Mm-hmm.
And
No, I.
just sorry, and just for the interest of the viewers, the third point about who brought slavery to Grenada, the French or the British.
Yes, the French brought slavery to Grenada, but slavery expanded under the British.
Under the
Yes, it did. And it was the British who expanded the plantation economy. As a matter of fact, they were searching for a cash crop, a monoculture economy that they could make a killing out of. While the French were trying out and experimenting with different agricultural experiments, for example, right, like tobacco and cotton, it was the British who found that sugar could become king, and sugar could become a cash crop, and sugar expanded under British colonialism. So it is not fair. I mean, and we can also say that they both benefited from the plantation economy. We can say that one expanded the plantation economy, but we do also have to recognize that even implicit within that statement is that both of them should pay reparative justice to Grenada and and the Caribbean, isn't it? That it isn't a matter of who brought it. What it is that they both participated in it and they both benefited from it. And so we need reparative justice from these nations who were developed, and we are now very underdeveloped. And just to piggyback on Angus's point here that he made, we also have to look at how we live with the impact of slavery. So to those persons who say slavery was a long time ago, we know that there is certainly a disconnect. We know that our people are not as attached to an understanding of slavery because of our education system, not a fault of their own. But the point that we have to make is that to understand how an event affected different groups of people, we must view it through the lens of its impact. So slavery ended in 1838, but the people's conditions were not repaired. The people were still set on a path of inequality. The planters were the landlords, for example. They were the ones in the legislature making the laws, and the laws benefited the plantocracy, the planters. The enslaved peoples would spend freed peoples now would spend hundreds of years trying to make the kind of freedom that they wanted. Emancipation brought no material advancement. We would say in local parlance, not even 1 red cent were they given, or as George Grizan said in his book, Grenada Island of Conflict, they were not even given a square inch of land. So emancipation was non-reparative, given nothing to repair their conditions, and they lived with the inequalities. Today, we live with the direct impact of colonialism, poor healthcare systems. This is not a making of our present moment. This is what we inherited from underdevelopment. We lack the technological innovation that we need to drive revenue, invention, and creativity in our space. Our education system is still tied to how it was taught years ago. We're making changes in many regard. For example, we still live with the psychological impact. Emancipation did not repair the conditions of the people. And so it is quite clear that we must never say one group brought it, and so the next one who extended it or the next one who was involved should not have to be the only one to make reparative justice. They must all make reparative justice because we all live with lack in the region. We live in a region that is not sustainable. And one of our leaders once said that if the United States cough, we catch pneumonia. That was Morris Bishop, because it is true. So we have to understand. And to the people who say, boy, slavery was so long ago, I don't know what reparative justice would do. Our governments would steal all the money. And I'm putting it how I hear it, right? And what my students say to me and what others say to me. And I say to the people, there is a way in which we can establish a process which has been done through the Caribbean Reparations Commission on how reparative justice must be done. Right? There is a 10-point plan that CARICOM has, and it speaks to how this process must unfold. We must never say slavery does not affect us, because it does. We must never say that, oh, it affected people a long time ago. That is unfair and it's insensitive, because always remember that every generation has to deal with a moment of injustice or moments of injustice in a different way. Our moment may very well now look as the impact of slavery and colonization, or the fact that we cannot change our constitution unless we have certain arrangements in the House of Parliament, a two-thirds majority vote, or we can't change anything unless we have a referendum. In other words, the people have to understand why we're changing, when it is quite clear of why we must change, right? So we must never make these statements that one didn't benefit or one benefited more or one didn't start it, because the whole point is that they were both involved, and the British Parliament has never made an official apology. They have never made an official apology.
Yeah. We wouldn't have been having this argument had the British been successful in 1609, because the British actually were the ones that made the first attempt to settle Grenada in 1609, but they failed. And then the French came. And granted, the French were the ones that set up the system, but the British would say the French started it and the British made it great.
For
So
them.
I don't think I think of course I don't think there's much of an argument there, in the sense that we see that throughout the region. These islands change hands multiple times. You know, we see it in the case of St. Lucia, which changed hands supposedly 14 times. You know, so I don't think that there's much of an argument. I think we have two to get from, as opposed to just one for Barbados and other places, or Jamaica. But no, I don't think that's an argument at all. It doesn't hold much water in terms of, well, they were there first and things like that. The British actually, when the British showed up, they doubled the enslaved population within a 10-year period, because they showed up and they're like, we could do better than this. So when you look at the massive amount of enslaved people, captives that were brought in on British ships, it's a very different scene you see from the French. So I think both of them, there is no argument there. I think you can see both of them as being colonials of Grenada, and they built a foundation on which slavery survived for over close to 200 years.
Yeah,
And I was going to say as well, as a final point where this is concerned, it sounds like we're double conscious, that we're supporting British colonialism over French colonialism, which is something that we've also picked up in the ways in which people think about the colonial powers that we have gained from British colonialism. People tend to hold that view. It is also an incorrect view as well, denying what existed before, which was what the indigenous people had. And of course, we would never know what other forms of development they would have been able to create in the space, because they were decimated by the millions.
Okay, I just want to take some of the comments from the chat here.
Okay.
Martin Felix says we should also see these relics as psychological triggers.
Mm-hmm.
It is not unlike rape victims being tormented after the event.
Yeah.
Martin Felix, Omar Houseman says yes.
Yeah.
And Martin Felix says the Rastafarian line symbolism is from the Ethiopian royalty. Grant says, very interesting, Dr. Mitchell-Hall. All of these in plain view. I think all the points you were making about the symbols. From Berlin, we need to know your view on the church have on the influence on the history of Grenada. And this person said, I think we should discuss it. Martin Felix says, excellent argument. I think that was one of the earlier arguments by Angus or you, Candia. And Hubert Osman says, I agree, it's we take, that's the jab. Martin Felix says we also need our indigenous petroglyphs. I hope I have it pronounced correct. He says all these artworks. Yeah?
Yes, petroglyphs.
Petroglyphs on our coat of arms.
That's
And
right.
says as well.
I thought that was an interesting one.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Jem FM says, was Willie Lynch lawful or were his methods unlawful?
I think that is something that has been debunked, the Willie Lynch narrative. So I'm not willing to discuss it, but based on what I know of it.
So he's asking whether lynching was part of the experience of the enslaved peoples in the Caribbean.
I guess that's what he's asking. I'm not sure. But he goes on to say about slavery, making some of the points you made, Candia. He said, at least one of them, they would have continued that means slavery if there had not been an economic transformation. Grant says the entire thing underscores the importance of reclaiming our education. All that was being said about the coat of arms and some of what Angus said about the streets and so. In 2025, we are still seeking advice from outside to reform our system when the outside systems suppress the truth.
That's right.
Martin Felix makes the point that apartheid was also a body of laws. Apartheid was lawful. Jem FM says, if it was the law at the time, why then in the case of Hitler, why are we searching for members of the German army to try them for crimes against humanity? But you cannot try overseers of slavery and making it law. I guess he say as deal with the issue of reparation. Dave Ned says the point is that Africans benefited from the slave trade. And Dave Ned also says our forefathers were sold and benefits were accrued by both parties. Jem FM says we must factor in that the armed slave traders in Africa were the leading traders of African people. What kind of benefit Africans got from slavery? I guess that's Jem FM is asking that of Dave Ned. And Martin Felix says, Jem FM, I always ask this question from people who take this position, and I never get a credible answer. Where are the African banks, railroads, factories, etc., that come from its purported roots of slavery? Jem FM said, Dr. Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and by extension the Caribbean and North America, is relevant, I guess he's saying, and Martin Felix. In his book, Caribbean History, Tony Martin traces that the first captured Africans were Portuguese raids on the West African coast. These Africans were brought to Spain and Portugal. Some of these first enslaved were then later brought to the Americas, but they had to convert to Christianity first. Dave Ned says, Jeff, your question answers itself. Trade in any form does not yield equal benefits. If you trade a human being with a lifespan of 6 years or a bottle of rum, the benefits are obvious. Jefferson says the European playbook is still the same today. They continue to make Africa unmanageable through regime change and civil wars, while they continue to exploit the resources of Africa. The modern economic hitman is, by extension, still slavery in my view. And someone called Lola says Africa wars.
That's right.
So those are the comments there.
Africa.
Yes, a while, some months ago, Dr. Tennyson Joseph appeared on this program, and he made the point that, uh, yes, of course, he's 100% in support of reparations, but he made the point that the irony is that while we ask of others to do things in terms of reparations, certain things which are within our powers to do, we have not done them or we are not doing them. Uh, and when you were speaking about the renaming of the streets, that was as a small one, relatively speaking, that occurred to me. What, of course, the argument about the coat of arms and so on also falls into that. How you will respond to this comment from
Yeah.
Dr. Joseph?
I think that's valid. I think sometimes we talk. I think Candia mentioned the 10 points. We talk about indigenous population. What have we done in places like Dominica? To advance the cause of the indigenous peoples. And some things have been done, but maybe more can be done. So yes, there are things that we can do without even looking outward. And there are things that are being done, but on a very small scale. But I do think that when it comes to looking at colonialism, we've dropped the ball on it. I think once we got independence, we thought that was it, and not looking at all of the structures that were still in place. The fact that we stopped wearing the wig in 2018, that was brought about by our then president of the Senate, um, Chester Humphrey. So up until that period, we were still wearing the wigs and the white gloves and things like that, and nobody saw a problem with that. So but it was something that was done locally, but the British had actually done away with it in their parliament, long before we did. And there are probably other things, we still run around with robes in our judiciary, in our courthouses and things like that. We never even think if we should be wearing it or not. Nobody has ever brought that up. Even when we did the referendums, the idea of the British monarch, should there be on the referendum, was never even there. So yeah, so I think that sometimes we tend to look outside and look at the things other people can do, but not always the things that we can do. But I guess when looking at what was done this year with the who do we swear to, that was something that was very much from inside, and we actually had somebody in the Scottish Parliament asking, why don't they follow Grenada? That was interesting. So no, I do think that it's a matter of consciousness that we need to become more aware of these things that are still part of our society and discuss them, debate them in our society and see what it is we can do before we ask others to do things for us.
No, I mean,
Why we ask others to do things first?
yeah, yeah. So,
They can be
yeah,
done together, I think, not so?
it's right.
Sure,
So
we can work on at the same time. Yeah.
so that is my
The old
view.
folks who say charity begins at home.
That's what they said. Charity does begin at home. There are things that we can do in Grenada for ourselves, but it does not nullify the calls that are being made, or it
Not
doesn't
at all.
make it less important the calls that are being made for reparative justice. A grave
Not at
evil
all.
was done against the humanity of millions of people. 10 million people were taken. Some scholars say 20 million people were taken from West Africa under a condition of chattel slavery. But I do agree that while that is taking place, we can also, from the charity that begins at home idea, do find ways that we can decolonize for ourselves and make repair as well. So yes, you mentioned the dress code. This is one, but there are also other dress codes, not just a dress code in parliament, but also dress codes when you enter a public building. You must be fully covered, and some of these things. And the young people have been seeing the comments on social media that it is not in keeping with our hot tropical climate and how they want to be free. That people in the past from England and so on dressed in the clothing of England, even while they were in the Caribbean, because they were England minded or they were colonial minded. They were not thinking about the region per se. So I agree that view, dress codes, how you appear to a public building, how we talk about hair in our schools, and the big debate about hair, good hair and bad hair, how we keep policing hair in our schools. For example, if you have a certain 4C type of hair, then you have to keep it well kempt and cornrowed and neat and so on. But if you have other types of hair, it can remain loose. We keep policing hair. We keep policing black aesthetics. So that is one. We had mentioned the names of streets, for example. But there is a point, of course, as well, when we would realize that we cannot change everything in one moment. It would be gradual, and so the changes have begun. We have started to make the change, and we will continue to make calls for reparative justice, but we must also look internally at the things that we can do. Teaching history in the schools, this is something that we must do. Changing up the history books, the kinds of knowledge that we want to transfer to our students. So for example, it shouldn't just take a book. Small pamphlets can be created on cultural expressions, for example, transferring knowledge, the transfer of Grenadian values to the children in our schools. Short pamphlets using murals on walls, for example, to insert the Black identity, the African identity, the national identity, using billboards, for example, to assert that identity. These are ways that we can begin to repair, using our schools as fertile grounds to teach students our national identity. You can teach nationalism, you can teach patriotism. And one of the nations that does this in the world is the United States of America. It teaches patriotism, it teaches nationalism, right? We see people when the national anthem is being played and they're sitting down. These are ways of repairing ourselves, of valuing who we are. When the national anthem is, it can be taught in schools. Our children can be taught to be good civic citizens and to be responsible citizens. So all of these things can also be taught in schools. And there are a lot of other ways in which we can begin to repair internally inside Grenada while we continue to make calls on those who gain the lion's share of the development. So I agree with Professor Tennyson Joseph.
Mhm. Yes. Okay, just one or two more comments. Well, there's an argument between JMFM and Dave. JMFM said Dave is trying to credit the enslavers and blame the enslaved. Are you suggesting that the bottle of rum that was used to intoxicate people is a benefit to the enslaved? Grant says in the age of technology, we can also get the help of influencers, hit social media, and blast the information in small bites.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Dave responds by saying that JMFM can
You missed the
JMFM
point.
you miss the point that trade
Mm-hmm.
is never equal. Trade is fair once both parties are satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
I am crediting nobody. The enslavers were Africans and Europeans. Those are the facts.
Yeah.
Martin Felix says excellent points, sister.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
well, it has been lively tonight. We love the person from the Speaker of the House. I know Chester Humphrey wanted to be here, but he's just not able to be here. What you said about the wing Angus, he causes abolition.
Yeah, he
That's
was on the Chester that
what,
the wig was gotten rid of.
okay.
We had a conversation about it. It was I think 17. So up until then, we were still wearing the wigs. and carrying the
Okay.
mace.
Okay.
When it goes into Parliament, every time we have the big opening of Parliament and stuff. And I guess back then it's not something that people wanted to get rid of. That we look at it all the way, 2017, and there's still places in Africa where they still wear the wigs. Even in the judiciary and things like that in the court, you see people wearing the wigs and the
What's the
gowns.
symbolism of the wig? What's the history of it? You know?
Oh, it just has to do with back in the day when the king did something, everybody followed. Somebody had a bald head and they didn't want a bald
That's
head, they wear
right.
a wig.
That's right.
And it just became a tradition. And it was actually
Yes.
a very expensive tradition because those wigs cost thousands of dollars. And you had to
Yes.
treat them to make sure bugs didn't live in them and things like that.
Mhm.
And that
So
would
we
have
actually, like I said,
been a king who had a ball and wore the wig.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
exactly.
All kinds of different scenarios.
Sometimes you come across something language, and
Right.
I once saw an explanation. It was a king who mispronounced the word or misused the word, and once the king
And
did
nobody
that,
wanted to.
it became proper to use it in that way.
Right.
That's
I think in Spanish there's something about somebody had a lisp,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
and then it affected the language.
Yes. But the point is, I only ask because the point is, if the wing was changed by the parliament to a maybe the other things, there are other probably limited changes that can be made, and that will fit
Right.
into what
Right.
Professor
And
Joseph
I
said
think even
about
the
us.
Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
I think the Constitution, even though we want to make sure that is something that we hold steadfast to, we do have to recognize that the Constitution is text. Text is based on interpretation. So
Yeah,
we can interpret that Constitution. We have our legal scholars who can take a look at that text and figure out ways of how we interact with it. So I don't think, do we know what, most of our Constitution actually came from 1967 Associated States Constitution. Most of it was just carried over. They really didn't add that much to it. So we have a Constitution that really dates back to the 60s that didn't reflect our independence then even.
yeah.
So I think we can find ways of interpreting the text just like we did for the swearing, who we swear allegiance to. So
But
I think there's a lot.
generally, generally,
You have
parliament
come up with
is,
your own theory in how we could actually go to a republic without even having a referendum. By looking at the way the Constitution is currently set up.
yeah.
So I think these are things. It's how we engage. Go ahead. Sorry.
I would say generally, though, Parliament has control of its own procedure. So I suspect that if they are so minded, there are quite a few things that can be changed without the need for passing laws or going to a referendum or amending the constitution.
Right.
But I'm not saying, I'm not pointing to anything specific. I'm just making a general point.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
things are traditional practices. They're not based in anything other than it was started. Some of them we can't even figure out when they were started.
Oh, why? Which is what we're seeing with the wig. So the notion of that you asked why they wore the wig and why it was changed, it was seen as impractical to our hot tropical climate. So just as that one was seen as impractical, it is the same way that all of the others can be seen as irrelevant. It means the change is here, and the people who want to hold on to tradition, let's understand that traditions evolve, and we're making our new tradition. Yeah, we're making a tradition of freedom. We're making a tradition of independence, and we're making a tradition of putting Grenada first. So just as we stop wearing the wigs, we're going to stop wearing the gongs soon, that those have to go too, because those are not, they are not appropriate at all for the hot tropical climate. I see people wearing some nice African garments and so on, and those are more appropriate. They look more stylish on the black aesthetic, the black body, and we want to support that. So just as the wigs went, the gongs will soon go, and other vestiges will also go, and we will all be applauding. And for those who won't be applauding, they will come on board in time to come. That's our hope.
And what's your perspective on soon?
On the what?
Soon, the term soon.
Oh, soon. Well, I like to use soon as a
Is that,
point
is
of
that a
optimism.
is that a Jamaican soon? Is that a
No,
Jamaican soon?
well, the Jamaican soon is a soon that does not
Soon
happen in the
go.
near present. It is a soon that evolves over time, and,
Okay.
but this soon that I am referring to is something that is going to take place in our present tense, in our present moment. Hopefully, with advocacy activism, I see a live group on social media, and they are on fire for this kind of change for Grenada and this kind of progress. And if we all keep up this momentum, then in years to come, perhaps sooner than later, we will pin it down and Grenada will become a republic. And that is where we want to go. So it's important for us to continue to have the dialogue. Education has to be at the center of that, because it is very clear that we need to have more conversations with our students, place the students at the center of national development. Education is an important prong of national development, and continue to have these conversations with the public, town hall meetings, community center meetings on a school level, the NGOs out there having the conversations, private parties having the conversations, and different stakeholders all coming together to have the conversation, because we all want Grenada to advance, right? Isn't that what our motto says? That we want to advance, we aspire for that
As far advanced
advancement.
as one people. Yeah.
Yes, that is what it says. And so we are in a moment of aspiring. We're in a moment of aspiring and building as one people and advancing. So let's say hello to the change, and cling on to a new tradition. Let's make this new tradition, Grenada. Let's do it. We can.
Good. Okay, before we end, again, I just want to thank those who sponsor this program. Gel Professional Solutions Inc., Gem FM, carried it on FM radio out of Canada, also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers. But just let's go directly to take the closing comments. Ladies first, once again.
Ladies first. We
Uh,
are
We still,
very much on
one,
point with Gem.
just one comment. Let me get one comment
we
from
still
the
tradition.
let me get one comment from the chat. Amal
Okay.
Hosman says, great discussion. Looking forward to more open discussion in the future. Just a discussion on, quote, the Republic of Grenada, unquote, is in the making, and Ghana interests of all. Okay.
Exactly. So my final thoughts, Grenada and Layne and Angus on legal eyes. Removing colonial relics is not erasing history. It is completing an act of national independence and freedom. It is writing a new line in our narratives about how we wish to own our own freedom making. Relics belong in museums where they can be preserved, they can be studied there, they can be taught within their correct historical context. And of course, we have to also remember that the time has come to replace the symbols of oppression with symbols
You're
of
sorry,
Grenada.
but you're breaking up again, Candia. Just in the end there.
I was saying that it is time to replace the colonial symbols with symbols of
Yes.
Grenada. It is time to ditch the colonial relics. It is time to choose Grenada. It is time to make a new tradition. Let us make the new Grenadian tradition for the people of Grenada, by the people of Grenada, so that we would have full political and cultural and economic sovereignty over Grenada, more than land we love, but the land we aspire to continue to build and advance as one people. The time is here, the moment is here. We say yes to reparative justice, and we say yes to republic status for Grenada, a land of beauty, a land of grace, a land of so much grace, and hospitable and loving people. It is time to begin a new tradition, Grenada. Let us cling to that tradition from today, the Grenadian way, the Grenadian tradition.
Yep.
I guess to echo Candia, I've been advocating for us to make some of these, at least the more blatant ones, to make some of these changes. I think every society goes through this. We have conservative and progressive, and everybody. I think it needs to be a process that's transparent in the open. Grenadians have to have a part in it, but I think before everybody can have a part, we do have to share the knowledge as well, because some of this is not just open; it's not just out there. Few people have seen the mace at a close distance.
Feels glance,
Most people
yeah.
have seen it on television or something like that. So I think we do need to share the knowledge first. We do need to share a lot of this history with our fellow Grenadians, and then get together and openly discuss it, argue back and forth, and be able to give people the confidence to say, you know what, maybe it's a time. And like I said, this stuff is not going to disappear. This stuff is going to go to the museum, where you could still go see it in its context, and be able to have. We have institutions where we put things, throw things away in a sense, and those institutions will keep these traditions that we no longer need or use. So I look forward to the future. I am very hopeful. It has taken us a while to get here, but I think we are at this place where a certain consciousness, has been necessary, and I think it's going to propel us further along in achieving a more Grenadian approach to the way we see the next 50 years.
Okay, thank you to the viewers, and thank you, Candia, and thank you, John and Gus. This has been a spirited conversation tonight, and the passion with which both of you speak in terms of Grenada, and so it's really inspiring, and very inspiring and very touching. The history of our country is very complex, but there is a goodwill. There's a goodwill running through our people. Somebody made that point to me a few days ago, say that Grenadian, given our experience and given our history, and we are truly exceptional, and many people around the world recognize that. I know, in fact, that I've seen people from other nations write about that, in terms of that ability for us as Grenadians to really demonstrate our greatness in so many ways. So I really want to thank both of you, and thank all those viewers, and thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Sure.
Great.
Bye.